we're going to talk a little bit more about what it means there and unpack this a little bit further. So just going in here, and I think, a lot of people have been talking about this slide, and I think it means a lot of things to a lot of different folks, whether it's creative, whether it's activation. And for analytics, obviously, I think we have a lot of buy-in here because it literally calls out data. So, one of the number one things that we saw right away was transparency with the shopper data. What are your customers doing? Not just how they're interacting with your ads, not just where you're finding them on the internet, but what are they actually doing with your retail storefront, with your .coms? How are they interacting? Is price an influence on them? And that's going to be key for selling in more opportunities for them longer term. Self-service options, again, these are feature sets that aren't ubiquitous across everybody today. There's a lot of RMNs today that do a lot of hand-holding when it comes to reporting, custom deliveries, and things like that. And that's something that's top of mind. And you might be thinking to yourself, okay, well, I also see transparency and reporting going down here. I think it's key to call this out and to talk about the fact that people understand the existing reporting. People understand what the existing offering is. So although still important for everybody to continue, the brands that is, to continue to have a really strong understanding of what each RMN is offering, there's opportunity here to pivot away from the existing reporting to new offerings, to things that aren't a part of the RMN today. And so what does that really look like on behalf of the RMN? Like what can you do? So again, kind of talking about the number one thing, offering data without having to run media. Offering ways to derive insights about customers and ways to get more information about how they're behaving and what sorts of things they're doing with your brand, and offering that information up as a value add, or even for a pay-to-play opportunity, will be great for our partnership. And again, when we talk about partnership, that's the types of things that we're talking about here. Go ahead, please.
Do you find that brands are willing to pay for the data? I found that brands say, I'm very interested in the data, but I'm not willing to pay for it. I'd be willing to pay for media, but not necessarily for the insights. So I clearly see the interest in it, but not necessarily the willingness to pay.
No, that's absolutely right. That's a great point. And so for those that didn't hear, it's how willing are brands actually to pay for this? I think we've all heard this information. Brands obviously come to the table asking for more and more things. And I think that's the balance here. When we talk about the automation aspect, and the offering this opportunity up to the brands. How you price it out, I think is going to be dependent on your individual RMN, right? Each RMN is going to be, like Walmart is going to be offering a very different product than Amazon that's going to be offering something completely different than Target, right? So everybody has to tailor those offerings to themselves. And with automation, that will lower that cost for you to offer that information up, right? And then looking at it as not just a standalone product, what about a value add with JBP conversations? What about a value add if you hit a certain spending tier? There's many different ways that you can think about data monetization, and I think we're just starting to scratch the surface within the marketplace here. And again, as you kind of continue to look at these things, again, lower CPMs, brands are willing to pay more for this information. Like the CPM and the competitiveness of the market, or the RMN itself, is less of an importance today because they're actually able to kind of see the value that you're bringing to them. And so I'm going to pass it over to Karina to talk a little bit more about how this comes to life.
So we've heard data monetization 10, 11 times now. We should have turned it into a drinking game when we started this afternoon. But it is the most popular thing on everyone's minds. We've seen the survey results. You've seen the same slides now a couple times. And the big question here is, well, what am I doing today that I should be doing? And what are other people talking about? So over on the left side of the slide are your basic KPI metrics. We're seeing almost every single retail media network offering these KPIs in some capacity. They are still very valuable to brands. They still need to understand the success of a campaign when they're giving their dollar. Now, when we're talking about data monetization over on the right, it's the same concept of understanding how valuable that dollar was that they handed over. It's just a different kind of analysis that they're looking for. So we're talking about things like data sharing, commingling of data, as well as just selling data outright. And there's a lot of pieces that need to be in place in order to make that happen. Our friendly little triangle over here, remember this is analytics, we love shapes. Starting with identity resolution. Now this is the foundation of any kind of analysis within a retail media network. Everyone that is already giving measurement has this in place. So the foundation is already there. But turning the capabilities with the clean rooms that everyone has already today and using them in a different capacity. This is talking about being able to take in that commingled data, It's being able to take your clean room and have it outward facing, privacy compliant, to allow the brands to come in and share their data with you. This leads to efficient transparency. Now, we here at Merkle have been using transparency for years now, usually synonymous with insights, data, reporting. What we mean with efficient transparency is now having that dollar working not just for the brand that you are all taking in and using for them, but having it work for you as well. And what do I mean by that? So when we're talking about taking in that data, we want to make sure that we're not opening the floodgates and turning on every single piece of data, one, to stay privacy compliant, but two, if you're going to overwhelm someone with data, they're not going to use it or they're not going to understand it. And so now that dollar isn't working for them anymore. In order to make this an efficient piece of transparency, this is where partnership comes in. So the last piece we have on here is just talking about how the importance of clean rooms. Everyone's using them today. Everyone's using them basically the same way, which is for that identity graph and then doing closed loop measurement. But there's many more things that you can do. And the big thing that we're hearing brands asking for is co-mingling. They want to be able to pass over their audiences and match them with yours. It's a win-win situation for them because they have these smaller first-party data sets and they really don't know as much about them as they would like to. Now, everyone in this room has very large data sets that they all want to understand better. Previously, it was just through campaigns. How did the audience that I targeted perform? Now they're like, what is my shopper like at your store? And that's a different analysis. You don't need to run media in order to provide that to them, but they always want to know that. So in summary, when we're talking about data monetization, I'm gonna go backwards today, because you've already heard it many, many times. This is the biggest thing that we're seeing in the survey results. This is why we're all here talking to you today, especially Steve and I, is to make sure that when we're talking about the offerings that are coming out of RMNs, to start plus upping with data monetization. And for retailers that may be trying to start a retail media network, this is also an opportunity to be exploring data, enriching it, and sharing it out. Also on here is the identity and technology. I just want to summarize one more time. This is a lot of technology that's already in place, that's already getting used for retail media networks to execute campaigns, and now it can work harder for you to generate more dollars.
Thanks, Karina. And just to kind of round things out, methodology really matters. Like even on the metrics and everything in the information that you're providing today, transparency around how those KPIs are coming to life. Like when we all say incremental lift, that can mean a myriad of different things to every single retailer. And we even heard it with some of our survey respondents that it's really hard for brands to compare and understand how their dollars are operating and what the incremental lift means from one RMN to another. What if we had a world in which brands were able to understand easily across and what was going on with each of those brands and how that information was actually performing and having that transparency? And lastly, partnership supports trust, right? So again, as we think about all these things building on each other, it's again about this partnership. How do we find more ways to collaborate with brands? Because the more integrated we become with the brands and less of a siloed operation, which I know a lot of the RMNs out there are, you become part of those buying, part of those JBPs, part of those bigger packages. And that's how we start to level up those opportunities and find ways not only to make more money with the brands and for them, but for your teams as well, and how to actually improve ROI. So we really appreciate your time. Any questions?
As you look at data sharing, how are you thinking, or how should we be thinking about making it a constant revenue stream versus a one-and-done data share?
That's a really great question. For those that didn't hear it, how do we think about data sharing and how do we make it a constant revenue stream versus a one-off, right? I think the key thing is as we all are here for, marketing. When we think about doing one-off, doing a proof of concept with a given brand and a retailer, finding ways to capture the actual insights and show that value back in a very crisp and clean format, and then blinding that information and sharing it out and having that in the hands of your salespeople on an ongoing basis as part of the packages that you're selling in. And again, we think of it as a value add. It could be a value add to your platinum or your gold tiers that you're selling in, or it could be a part of something that they buy in as a one-off. again, it really depends on what we mean by data sharing, because it could be something as simple as let's upload a first-party data set and find a lookalike audience and monetize on that. That could be a very different pricing structure than buying in and understanding what's in a basket for my buyer, right? Like I have a first-party data set and I want to understand what else is everybody buying, like so that I can actually maybe go out and do joint ventures with other brands and find opportunities there. So certainly a lot of opportunity to go in there.
I'm just going to pile on to that. If you recall, in one of the survey results, the number one thing we saw was self-serve up there. And so one of the trends that we hear a lot of people starting to talk about is subscription-based. Now, this can be partnered, just like Steve mentioned, as part of your packages. Maybe the highest package has unlimited seats and they get a customized visual or something like that. But if you're trying to get a new partnership, for example, this is something we see as ad hoc all the time in retail media networks, where they do an audience analysis to try and generate the dollars. Now you could do a subscription to start a new partnership.